Welcome to Leave the Leaves, a presentation about life in the leaf litter. I'm Janet Gingold. After retiring from work as a health care provider and a science teacher, I became a Maryland Master Naturalist and a Sierra Club Outings leader to help others connect with nature. I like to spend time wandering around in the woods looking at stuff and wondering about how life works and noticing connections. Today, as fall is getting started, I'd like to share some thoughts about how things fall apart and about life amidst the leaf litter, all that miscellaneous plant matter that ends up on the forest floor. I'm not a leaf litter expert, more of an interested observer. I'm going to share a way of looking at things and thinking about things, which I hope you will find useful as you contemplate how to care for your own patch of land or how to engage others in thinking about nature-based antidotes for the impacts of human activities. With a few exceptions, the photos I'm sharing are from the Patuxent River watershed in the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. I'm ever grateful for Earth's gifts, and I offer my thanks to those who have cared for this land through past generations and to those who continue to care for it now for generations to come. Having spent some time as a science teacher, I feel the need to start out with a little bit of basic science as a warm-up. We'll call to mind some basic principles about the way Earth works for context, and then we'll use local nature pictures for an armchair walk through the woods. Then we'll raise some questions about our current yard care practices and whether we should change what we're doing. And there will be time for your questions and comments at the end. So, Earth is round. It spins around on its axis and it revolves around the sun. The way it works depends on things going around and around and around. Now, energy comes in from the sun and goes back out to space, but Earth's matter is conserved. The various atoms and molecules that make up the Earth and everything that lives on it come together and fall apart and move around between these various spheres: the gaseous atmosphere, the water hydrosphere, the rocky geosphere, the frozen cryosphere, and the living biosphere. Diagrams like these are probably in your mental attic since science lessons long ago, but let's just dust them off and revisit them briefly to get us thinking about how the processes shown affect and are affected by what happens in the leaf litter. In a terrestrial ecosystem, living things grow by taking atoms and molecules from the atmosphere and the soil and each other. What they shed or drop or leave behind ends up on the ground as litter. That's the litter we're talking about here. The litter breaks down by being eaten and digested and decomposed into the atoms and molecules that can be used by more living things. The key point here is in these blue arrows, they go around and around and around. Biomass, the matter that makes up living things, falls apart in the litter, and then that returns matter to the soil and to the atmosphere, replacing the necessary components for the construction of more living things. The blue arrows keep going around and around. Now, Earth has lots of cycles. We have the water cycle, condensation, precipitation, evaporation, transpiration, water in its three phases: solid, liquid, and gas. Sometimes we forget about the importance of living things in this cycle, how vegetation slows down and takes up water and then returns it to the atmosphere, how that evapotranspiration causes cooling, how vegetation helps to keep water in the local system and creates the temperature and moisture conditions that are needed for living things to thrive. Diagrams of the water cycle often leave out the leaf litter, but the leaves and other bits and pieces on the ground play a very important role. By catching raindrops and slowing them down, they allow the water to drip and seep slowly into the soil instead of rushing away in the surface runoff that takes soil and necessary nutrients away with it. When a tree falls in the forest, its trunk might help stop erosion along a slope, allowing more water to seep into the soil and into the groundwater. Here's another thing about water. When it crystallizes, it expands. When water seeps through the leaf litter and down into the soil below, it moves into little air spaces. And then when water freezes, it expands. Sometimes when saturated soil freezes, you see these little ice crystals extruding, and you just can imagine that the same process that pushes these crystals out of the soil also enlarges the little air spaces down below that are so important for the function of the roots. All those fallen bits and pieces help keep the water in the local system where it not only becomes a building block for new plant matter, but also helps to maintain the temperature, moisture, and chemical conditions that are necessary for other living things to grow and thrive. So, next cycle, carbon cycle. Carbon cycles in and out of living things through photosynthesis and respiration. And we often focus on what's happening in the atmosphere when we talk about carbon cycle. But what happens to that dead stuff on the ground is also an important piece of this picture. As our tilted planet makes its way around the sun, changes in light intensity create our seasonal cycles, especially in our temperate forests. Earth breathes. This animated map was created by government scientists using data from NASA satellites. Notice that the northern hemisphere has more land mass than the southern hemisphere. The green areas you see are where the vegetation is doing photosynthesis, and the amount of yellow indicates the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This little video we're going to see here in a sec, if I can make it work, is it starts on January 1st when the northern hemisphere is in winter and the southern hemisphere is in summer. At this time of the year, most of the vegetation is around the equator and in the southern hemisphere where it's summer. Here, I'm going to start this video. I hope. And you'll be able to see it go through several of these seasonal cycles. As spring arrives, the northern hemisphere greens up, and then in the fall, the green fades out because the deciduous trees shed their leaves. Photosynthesis pretty much shuts down in the winter, but respiration continues, so carbon dioxide levels rise. Plus, we humans burn more fossil fuels when it's dark and cold. So when soils warm up in the spring, they release more carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide peaks in about May. But by then, the leaves are back in action, taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere to build more biomass. And throughout the warm months, all that photosynthesis is reducing the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Following the peak in vegetation, you can see the drawdown of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, especially over the boreal forests in the northern hemisphere. Each year, as the amount of photosynthesis rises and falls, the carbon dioxide levels fall and rise again. Now, thank you to all our government scientists for doing the work that they have been doing for years and years, and may they continue to do so in perpetuity. Now, remember this? Respiratory cycles. Out goes the bad air, in goes the good. Animals like us have short respiratory cycles where we take in and let out air to allow gas exchange that keeps our oxygen and carbon dioxide levels within the range we need for our cells to function properly. When we burn more calories and produce more carbon dioxide, we just breathe deeper and faster to get rid of the carbon dioxide so it stays within the normal range in our bodies. However, our planet can't make a quick switch in its breathing cycle to compensate when we start burning more fossil fuels and producing more carbon dioxide. Each year, the lowest carbon dioxide at the end of the growing season gets a little bit higher because we're adding carbon dioxide faster than it gets removed. And this cycle has turned into a spiral. Now, phosphorus and nitrogen also have their own cycles. Nitrogen, mostly in the air, gets combined with oxygen and hydrogen and gets taken up into the living things and eventually gets broken back down and released into the air again. And phosphorus, mostly in rock, gets dissolved into water and taken up into the soil where living things take it up to build useful structures like cell membranes and shells and bones. The stuff of life includes the carbohydrates that come from photosynthesis and also phospholipid bilayers of cell membranes that has phosphate in it, phosphates in it. Also, nitrogen and all those little molecular machines we call proteins, and the DNA that contains the instructions for how living things work, and the ATP that powers our cells. Um, every little thing that we for every little thing that we do. These complex molecules that make up living things eventually end up on the ground where they're deconstructed and recycled for reuse. They get eaten and digested and eliminated by creatures great and small. Living matter, biomass, eventually returns its components to the soil from which plants can pull those building blocks into roots for building more living matter. Earth's chemical cycles are inextricably linked to its biomass, and the connection happens through the leaf litter and the soil. And then we have all these little critter life cycles that depend on the presence of leaf litter and contribute to the cycling of materials. Leaves provide both food and shelter, as so many larvae grow and metamorphose amidst the leaf litter. And then they emerge as adults to reproduce and continue their life cycles. Digestion of the leaves by these little critters that eat them also helps in the recycling of all those necessary nutrients. Here are just a few of the insects that depend on leaf litter and live in Maryland. I remember early in the summer of this year, there was some local chatter about what happened to all the fireflies. We think of fireflies as lighting up the darkness, around the time of the 4th of July when we go to the fireworks and hey, they're just when the fireworks are starting, here come the fireflies. But they actually spend most of their life as larvae under the leaves. In that cool and moist environment, they feed on soft-bodied little creatures that also live in the leaf litter, like worms and snails and slugs. And in the shelter of layers of leaves, those baby fireflies eat and grow through the winter. Then in the spring, they pupate and emerge for the light show that they need for mating. But you know what? No leaf litter through the winter, no lightning bugs in the spring. I was so happy over the winter or back in the spring when I was hearing everybody worried about the fireflies. I went out to my backyard and there were 20 of them out there blinking and blinking. It made me feel like there was hope. Anyway, there is hope. Depends on what we do with our yards. All those bits of living things, all those little bits that living things leave behind have a role to play as these cycles reuse, recycle, and grow new living things. That's the way Earth works. So, with all that in mind, let's leave our virtual classroom and go out to our virtual woods. You never know what you might see. Sometimes you might miss something interesting because so many things are made to blend in with leaf litter. That's a little piece of a wasp nest. Even if you're not collecting serious scientific data and you don't know the names of everything, it can be fun just to see how many different species you can find in a small patch of leaf litter. And sometimes what you see at your feet tells you what's happening around you. Did you find a little critter in here? Here's a little friend, the teeny tiny toad. Around here where I live in the coastal plain area around Upper Marlboro, you'll see oak droppings to make new oak trees and hickory droppings to make new hickory trees and sycamore droppings to make new sycamore trees. Kaboom, you might find a big piece of sycamore coming down. Tulip tree droppings to make more tulip trees. And in the spring, if you find one of these tulip flowers, you know that the trees towering above you are flowering too, even if the flowers are too high up to see. In April, these sharp reddish brown bits appear, and they are little coverings that fall off the buds as the beech leaves unfurl. They add to the mix so the soil will contain the building blocks for more beech leaves next year. And when you look up, there you see new leaves popped out. That little Polyphemus moth left its remains there after a season of munching leaves and spinning silk up in the tree high above. Our feather friends leave things too. And hey, when you see spatters of nitrogenous wastes like this, you might, say, oh, yes, oh, that's nice because there's nitrogen there and that's needed to make more amino acids and more nucleotides so we can have things like proteins and DNA. But if you look up, you might find a bird's nest. Now, here are the assembly instructions packed inside this perfect package. Everything you need to know in order to make a new hickory tree. The sycamores are a little bit easier to open. What's in that leaf litter depends on what lives in the neighborhood. And as it breaks down, it creates the right mix for growing more of the same sorts of living things. Pines drop litter that's just right for growing more pine trees. Hemlocks drop litter that's just right for growing more hemlocks. Diverse mature woodlands drop litter that's just right for growing more diverse mature woodlands. Quiz question. Do humans drop litter that is just right for growing new humans? Not really, but anyway, there's this whole working web of life in, on, and under the leaf litter, and all of it's important for those cycles to keep going around and around. These guys hide pretty good, don't they? These adult butterflies and moths manage to avoid becoming bird food as larvae, but they still want to blend in. And they each have their own stories as they go through life, finding food or maybe becoming food, all that eating and excreting and procreating. These little six-spotted tiger beetles prefer to be more conspicuous. If you keep your eyes peeled, you might see some hunters going about their work, from itty-bitty red velvet mites to big wolf spiders. Sometimes you don't see the predator itself, but you can see the traps it built using the leaf litter. Snails and earthworms and termites and crickets and ants are all going about their daily lives, eating and excreting. You might come across a millipede or a harvestman busy harvesting. And all around, there are things at various stages of falling apart. Here's what becomes of the flower of a tulip tree by late fall, and these seeds that come off it, and this piece of tree being broken down by fungi. The mushrooms that we see popping up amidst the leaf litter are only a small part of the whole organism. We don't see the networks of microscopic hyphae that are breaking large organic molecules down into small components that will be taken up by growing plants. So many different kinds of fungus, an amazing network just out of sight below the surface that helps close the loop on those chemical cycles by breaking down large molecules into the small molecules that can be used by other growing things. Maybe it's hard to imagine those chemical reactions with those large molecules that you can't see, but hey, you can see these beautiful shapes and colors on the large tree trunks that they are slowly digesting. Many of these fungi have special relationships with other growing things. Every year, these ferns die back in Watkins Park near the Beaver Dam, where I like to go check out what's going on. It's always sad to see that little colony of ferns go, and I always wonder if they're ever going to be able to come back the next year. But the fungi remind us that the recycling crew is on the job, processing the building blocks, and they'll be ready for new growth next spring. Here's one of our native orchids, the cranefly orchid. The germination of its tiny seeds depend on a fungus that breaks down the rotting wood. The cranefly orchid leaves come out in October, and they stay all through the winter and spring. The flowers bloom briefly in July and create seed pods that release seeds into the litter, and then we see new leaves again in the fall. This fruit fell into the leaf litter from a pawpaw in the understory, and then it got clawed and partially eaten, maybe by this guy, or maybe by a raccoon. Notice the ant. See the ant right there in the middle. Ants amidst the leaf litter are extremely important players. All of these beautiful flowers that pop up in through the leaf litter in the spring. Spring beauties, Dutchman's breeches, bloodroot, round-lobed hepatica, trout lilies, cutleaf toothwort. They all depend on ants. It's an amazing story. All of these flowers make seeds that have a tasty, nutrient-rich little glob attached called an eliosome. Ants take the seed with its eliosome back to their underground homes. They feed the eliosome to their larvae, and then they discard the seeds in their refuse piles, which have everything the seeds need for germinating and growing. Both the ants and the plants benefit from this relationship. So next time you welcome the flowers that bloom in the spring, thank the ants. Sometimes in September, you'll see a sooty spot like this under a beech tree. You might think somebody has set a fire. If you take a moment to look closely, you might see some interesting activity. Bees, wasps, ants, flies, little white wisps. This totally weird little thing that was crawling along the trunk of a beech tree. What? If you look up, you will see a branch that looks like this, covered in aphids. They're beech blight aphids. They're also called boogie woogie aphids because a slight disturbance, like a puff of air, makes them dance. What's happening here is that the aphids suck sap out of the tree and, oops, wait a minute, sorry. And then they excrete a sugar-rich fluid that drips down onto the leaves. The insects come to eat the sugar. And then that gray discoloration that looks like soot comes from a type of mold that grows where more sugar is available. And that weird little thing walking up the tree trunk, it's probably a lacewing larva that hides from predators by attaching debris to itself. It found some fallen aphid fuzz to use as its cloaking device. In September, leaves in the understory show more signs of insect activity, and this isn't necessarily a sign of disease. It's just the web of life at work, consumers eating producers and decomposers at work. This is all part of nature's recycling apparatus. Those leaves have already done most of their work for the year, and they'd be toast in a few weeks anyway. So it's okay that the insects are using these plants. That's how it's supposed to work. Before this pawpaw leaf makes its way to the ground, it becomes food and shelter for a webworm moth larva. When the larva chomps on the leaf stem, interrupting the transport of water, the leaf starts to dry out and curl. And then the larva makes a web that pulls the leaf into a protective covering. Then, using its silk, the larva ties the old curled up leaf to a fresh green one that it then proceeds to eat while under the protection of its leaf shield. As it digests the leaf, it creates a lot of frass or caterpillar poop, which you can see here caught in this web. And that will eventually make its way down into the soil. If you saw this hanging in a gallery, you would marvel at the delicate intricacy of its construction and its delicate balance. Out here in the woods, you can wonder about how those pieces were pulled together and how long that webbing will hold the remains of the leaf onto that branch, and whether that hidden larvae will pupate before it eats up more leaves, and how that frass will add nutrients to the soil. A variety of vertebrates also find food in the leaf litter. Turtles, toads, skinks, salamanders that I can never find, so I don't have any pictures of, deer, lots of birds. Brown thrasher, song sparrow, ovenbird, white-throated sparrow, junco, wood thrush. One day I was walking along a trail in Watkins Park and I heard a lot of bird alarm calls and I saw some movement in the leaf litter. And there were three of these little baby uh, wood thrushes hopping about. I might not even have seen them if they weren't moving and making noise. I'm watching the birds, wondering where their parents are. And all of a sudden, I notice there's this big black rat snake with a bulge in it. It is probably one of the siblings. Well, snakes have to eat too, but I tried to tell that baby bird to get away from that snake, but it just stood there. Anyway, I had to trust that the ecosystem was going to provide food for the rest of that family, and that snake will have had enough for the day and leave the rest of them alone. But that's the way it is, life in the leaf litter. So, what is this? It's leaf litter to come. Next month, it'll be this, and then it will all fall down. And all those processes on the forest floor, the eating and the excreting and the decomposing and the osmosing, will create the conditions that are needed for new things to grow, completing the cycles that sustain the ecosystem. That's how it works. Okay, now we're going to shift to thinking about how what we do affects the system. Now, in recent decades, more and more of our landscape has become suburban residential developments, with lawns and shrubs and sparse trees replacing our diverse forests. The usual done thing is to rake up the leaves where they fall, and all of those nutrients with fungi and fruits and nuts and seeds and eggs and larvae and pupae and bird droppings and caterpillar frass, we cart them all off to the landfill where they get buried in a low oxygen environment that promotes respiration by microbes that produce a lot of methane. Methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Here's me promoting the county's program for taking residential organic waste to the organics composting facility. I'm a big fan. When food scraps and yard waste get composted instead of rotting in the landfill, we get much less production of methane. And we also get a great soil amendment that can be used to grow new things. And that's all good. So we still rake up all those leavings on our yard and we put it in paper bags and we truck it to Upper Marlboro. There it gets put into piles and processed with the help of huge machines that chop it up and sift it and put it in piles where microbes do their work. If only people would keep the plastic out of the bins. Here, take a look at this amazing machine whose job it is to sort the stuff that's too contaminated with plastic from the stuff that can actually be composted. Let me see if this will work.
Comes out the backside as over. Um,
That's the contaminated stuff coming out one end. Churning, churning, churning. And here's all the good stuff to come out the other end to make the compost in this big, huge pile. So we have this industrial scale operation that takes our organic waste and converts it to a valuable soil amendment. And there you have it. At this point in the story, the question invariably arises, how do I get some of that stuff for my garden? And you can buy it as leaf grow. It's available in bags and in bulk. And Dan, can you put that leaf grow link in the chat for us? So there's a list of retailers online, and yep, you can buy that stuff. But um, when we collect all that stuff that was destined for the soil, and we truck it to an industrial facility to make a product that will mostly be used to improve the soil elsewhere, is that looking like nature's cycle is being completed? Not really, right? It leaves our own soil without those breakdown products that are needed to complete nature's chemical cycles. When the nitrogen and phosphorus get taken up by our plants, but then don't get returned to the soil, our local nitrogen and phosphorus cycles become downward spirals instead of circles, and the soil has a little less nutrient content each year. So many of us who want to grow things, what do? We go and add chemical fertilizers, which then run off into our streams, putting too many nutrients where they don't belong. And that's not a good thing. So our human activities are interfering with the natural cycles that make our world work. And as we humans manage more and more of the land for our own purposes, we need to incorporate a better understanding of the function of leaf litter in Earth's many cycles. Whether we're talking about our own quarter acre of suburbia or our public lands, we need to develop nature-based best practices that let nature's circular economy work. We have lots of different kinds of publicly owned green space because, hey, people have a lot of different ways of enjoying the outdoors, and that's the way it is. We have gathering places and playing fields and picnic areas in the midst of wood chips, and we have lots of asphalt trails protected by gas-powered machines that blow leaves and munch up in any vegetation that might encroach. Lots of asphalt. I mean, our park planners need to make sure that the budgets are not all about mowing grass, laying more asphalt, and maintaining the built environment. We need to stop and think about how we can manage our land to ensure that nature can close those loops. We need to keep them more like circles and less like spirals, keeping water and nutrients within our local ecosystems and protecting our biodiversity. It will help if we invest in shrinking the lawns and planting more native plants that are chosen for their ability to thrive and contribute to the biological community where they are planted. Transitioning to electric maintenance machinery for less noise and air pollution would help. And we really have to get a better handle on some of those invasive species. We need to protect the spaces where people can connect with nature by getting close enough to really see it in action. And we have to leave the leaves, at least some of them, in places to give the creatures that depend on them a chance to find what they need in this changing world so that common things will stay common. And these beautiful fuzzy stemmed hepatica flowers will emerge through the leaves again in the spring. There are several websites that have really good advice about how to leave the leaves. I like this one from the Xerces Society and also this other one from Rutgers, and Dan can put those in the chat for us. Um, the National Wildlife Federation has a great one-pager about how to leave the leaves, and he can put the link to that in there too. The basic idea is that you don't have to rake up all the leaves and ship them elsewhere. Yes, too many leaves will interfere with the growth of grass, but do you really need to grow all that grass? Actually, you don't. It's a good idea to take some of those spaces that are all grass and change them into beds where you have groups of native plants that will be very happy if you leave the leaves around them. You don't have to leave every leaf where it falls. You can move them around if you need to. You can save some space for a brush pile where you can put extra leaves as well as other vegetative matter, including hollow stems and that many beneficial um, insects use. You can leave them in your garden beds around the base of trees. And really important to reduce the amount of lawn by planting more native plants and trees. On my little patch of suburbia, I leave leaves around my shrubs and trees, and I use this little back corner by the blue shed back there to pile up leaves and brush each year. Each year I put a whole big pile there, big heap, and every year by the time I'm ready to rake the next year's leaves, last year's leaves have pretty much disappeared. That's what you see there is 40 years worth of leaves. And they just go away without doing anything to them, not shredding them up or doing anything. It's just letting nature take its course. I have some pretty good sized trees that make a lot of leaves. So, I also sent some to the organics composting facility. So, each property is different. So you can't get on your high horse and kind of shame people into smothering their grass. Everybody has to have their own ideas about what they want their property to do, how they want it to function. But if we can work on helping people understand how these cycles work and get them to appreciate some of these interactions between different creatures that share the planet with us, hopefully we'll see more people shrinking their lawns and leaving more leaves. So be patient with your neighbors as you talk to them about it, but talk to them about it. If you have neighbors who think you are neglecting your property and driving down their property values because of your practices, um, some signage is sometimes helpful. I took this picture the other day in Silver Spring when I was visiting, and how can you complain about something like that? It's just so beautiful. So, Anyway, that's what I wanted to share with you today. I wanted to leave that with you. I hope that you'll take up and use some of these bits and pieces as you tend the land that you care for, and also maybe as you assemble interpretive moments that help others connect with nature. So now I'm going to stop this sharing thing and open up the floor so that you can share with us your questions or your comments or your ideas about what we should do better to help nature close those loops. Best way to do this is probably to use that little function in the that says reactions. If you can find that, if it might be in that little um, where it says more. Anyway, or you could just wave. Let's see who wants to say something, or do we have some things in the chat to share? Wendy, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. This was a wonderful talk. I really enjoyed it. And originally I was thinking, well, I don't know. I know so much about leaving the leaves, but I learned stuff from you. So thank you so much. I do have a question. So, um, there are parts of our yard that we keep as lawn, and we have a lot of gardens too. And when we rake the leaves onto some of our beds, it seems like in the spring, a lot of our perennials don't come up because there's like too many leaves there. So, do you have a suggestion for like how deep the leaf litter can be over established perennial beds?
My guess is that the true answer to that is it depends.
Okay.
And a lot on the kind of perennials, okay? So
Yeah.
um, from what I've read, and in the woods, if you go look, that uh, round lobe hepatica, that, oh wait, maybe I didn't even show you that picture at the end. Anyway, there's a picture of a round lobe hepatica coming up in Watkins Park. The leaf litter there is at least 6 inches deep, okay? And those flowers somehow manage to come up because that's what they do. They live on that slope in the right kind of soil, in the right kind of leaves, and that's just what they do, okay? So they will come up eventually if they're
Mhm.
the right kind of plant for that kind of
Right,
environment, right?
right, right.
So, I mean, one of the
Yeah,
things I read as I was preparing this thing said that if it's more than about 3 inches of leaves, it might be problematic. Now, if you start out with 6 inches of leaves, by the end of summer, I mean, by the end of the winter, it will compact, and you'll probably only have 3 inches of leaves. And
right, right.
most
But
things,
I think you made a really good point in that the plants that are adapted to live and emerge through the leaf litter are forest plants. And so the ones that we had trouble with were meadow plants, things like black-eyed Susans, brown-eyed Susans, and Jerusalem artichoke. So it occurs to me, based upon what you just said, that they are meadow plants and they're not adapted to having a lot of, tree leaves falling down on top of them.
who else is here who maybe knows more about garden plants that might be able to address Wendy's question? Anybody? Come on, don't be shy. I know there are master gardeners out there. They know all this. I'm at a sort of disadvantage because I don't really do garden plants. I just wander around
Yeah,
the woods watching what grows.
it's okay. It's okay. There are a lot of lessons to be learned from the woods. So Thank you. I appreciate it. I think I already gained some insights from what you said. Thanks.
Okay.
Janet,
Oh, yes, go
Joe,
ahead.
Joe has placed a question in the chat. Joe, if you want to come off mute and ask your question, you're welcome to. Otherwise, we can answer your question from the chat.
Uh, no, I can come off the mute. That's not a problem. I was just wondering what your take is on mulching leaves where they lay. So just mulching them on the lawn instead of breaking them into a pile.
Yep, okay, that's one thing that you can do with leaves. Um, and let's think about that for a second. Okay, so what you're doing is you're taking the leaves and you're breaking them down into little pieces, and then those little pieces fall amongst the blades of grass, and that stuff eventually gets broken down um, into in the soil, and that's okay. The problem with that though is that a lot of that other stuff that happens with the Lepidoptera and other larvae and baby critters, they all would get mulched up too. Okay. So if you're trying to grow butterflies, you're going to be crushing all those pupae and chrysalises that might otherwise, give you that great spangled fritillary or that red-banded hair streak or other things that you might be interested in seeing fluttering around your plants. So I think that it's a sort of a reasonable thing to do with some of the leaves. That's what I do with some of mine. I mean, I just run the lawnmower over them and they disappear, gone, poof. Okay. But you don't want to do that to all of the leaves because you would like to save some of those important insects eh, so that they can complete their cycle too.
Good, thank you. That perfect answer.
What else? I'm interested in whether any of you have developed your own um, sort of ways of managing your own property where you can share with us what you've done with your leaves. I mean, some of us have a whole lot of leaves on a small amount of property because we just love our big trees. But other people, don't have that many leaves and it's not a big deal. Some people have pressure from the neighbors and homeowners associations. And anyway, I'm interested in hearing your experience with any of that.
I was just say that our homeowners association has been informed that the state of Maryland says that you can no longer require your homeowners to have a green lawn. As soon as that went into effect a couple of years ago, I got rid of the whole front lawn and I've been slowly but surely changing it into a pollinator garden. But we do have a lot of large trees that leave millions of leaves in the fall. And I kind of pile them under the bushes that are, you know, big, like let's say azaleas, or I
Mhm.
leave them under those things and get them away from my flowering things. I don't know if that's the best way to handle it or not.
Yeah, well, that's good. Azaleas are shade-loving forest plants, right? So they're going to enjoy your deciduous leaves in their root system. That's good. Yeah. And like Wendy said, maybe some of those other meadowish kind of plants aren't going to do as well with the leaves on top of them. So you have to sort of kind of make a study of it. What is it that you're trying to grow? Where? And what's going to help them grow? I mean, ideally, you would like to give them what they need without dumping chemicals on them. You would like to be able to be adding real organic matter, which is the kind of organic matter that will give rise to the new organic matter that you're looking for. And sometimes it's fun to just see what comes up.
What about pine cones and gumballs?
Pine cones and gumballs. I have the pine cone thing too. We have these two loblollies in our backyard, and the neighbors are always throwing the ones that land on their yard back over into my yard. I just leave them there. I mean, every once a couple times a year, I will fill up several Lowe's bags full of them and send a couple Lowe's bags full of them to the Upper Marlboro for the composting. You know, they can go to the organics composting facility here in Prince George's County if you have access to that. But they can go. I mean, when I was just having some new native plants planted in my backyard, I asked my landscaper, well, hey, are the pine cones that are going to be falling out of these pine trees onto these, winter berries and other things that we were planting, are they going to cause a problem? And the guy said, no, just leave them there. Okay. That's all part of the stuff that is, if you don't like the way it looks, you can sweep it up and make it look differently. But in terms of the chemistry of it, it's not, uh, it, it's not going to hurt your plants. But, the thing about pine cones is that it does take a while for them to fall apart, right? They'll stick around for a year if you just leave them there. But they get covered in my yard. They get covered by the maple leaves and the oak leaves and the beech leaves, and so they're sort of all part of the mix, and you don't notice them after a while. I mean, when they all sort of fall down together, you notice a lot of them. Anyway, all things in moderation, even pine cones. Gumballs, oh, yeah, I don't know. They're kind of a nuisance. And you sort of have to decide. I mean, it's not like they're bad for the plants, but, they hurt when you step on them. And so that I think you have to sort of decide, where am I going to allow them to remain and where do I really need to move them? Okay. And you can do the same thing with gumballs, as I was just talking about with the pine cones. If there are too many of them, move them. But if you can put them someplace where they mix with other stuff and they'll be all right. Then you have to be worried, or is that where you want those seeds to take root and grow? That's another consideration. But of course, most of the seeds aren't going to take root and grow. Most of them will decompose and get eaten by critters that like to eat seeds. So anybody else have ideas about pine cones and gumballs?
I don't have an idea about those, but this is a banner year for acorns. Like every so often, our white oak has a zillion acorns. And if you don't rake them up, I have found they will start rooting. So I'm just curious why it happens. Just so every 5, 6, 7 years, you just get this like an incredible amount of acorns.
Yeah, well, that's part of the oak tree's strategy for survival. They call those mast years, where they're just a tremendous glut of oaks. And I think that feeds those squirrels. And there's a relationship between the amount of oaks and the amount of squirrels and the amount of things that eat squirrels and all of those. It's sort of like, the periodic cicadas, where, wow, all of a sudden there's this whole big bunch of bird food and there's like this big glut of cicada meat out there. And it's a sort of reset button for a lot of population dynamics that are affected by the availability of food. Maybe some of our biologists out there have more to contribute about why did the oaks decide in their wisdom that they should do this mast year thing. I mean, a lot of times when some organism has an sort of overwhelming broadcast of their prospective progeny. It's so that there will be survival of at least a few of them, right? Like they put out this huge explosion so that at least a few will survive. And it may be that the trees do this to some extent when they're stressed, so that the if they produce so many acorns and each one has a slightly different genetic mix, some of those acorns will just happen to be the ones that are going to be able to survive in the environment that is uh, that they end up in going forward.
Mhm.
Some of them won't. So, over the course of evolution of those oaks, there's some selective advantage for that mast year phenomenon. We got any botanists here who want to help us think about that one? People are being
I
so.
like the comparison to the cicadas.
I don't have anything about mast years to offer, but I just wanted to say this was so great. And I live in a small, very ecologically minded neighborhood in the city. And though people have over the years, left the leaves, more and more people are talking about it. It's become, even in this very accepting community, way more popular and way more normalized. And I think your point about signage, beautiful signage, newsletters, sharing websites with neighbors is incredibly important. And just to, do whatever we can as neighbors, as citizens, as friends to kind of normalize the practice. You have to really change the way the eye sees things.
Right.
So, sort of ethically, aesthetically, if you can, help people change how they see, um, it's incredibly important. And it's great to hear about the homeowners association. But whatever we can all do just to talk about it, just to start the conversation, just to back up, what you're doing, and to help people literally see differently. So I just wanted to thank you for all of this. It was great.
Well, if you're part of a book group, you might want to, along the same lines that Leah
Yeah.
was just saying, choose a book, one of Doug Tallamy's books, Bringing Nature Home, or his book
Mhm.
about oak trees, or his book about
Mhm.
the homegrown national parks. And any one of those really makes the case for this about how there are, when we have so much of our land that is privately owned and privately controlled, we really depend on what you were just talking about, Leah, that whole way people think about what
Yeah.
their yard is supposed to look like. And
Right.
okay. And it doesn't all have, with it, people invented these lawns so
Mhm.
that they could see the warriors coming up over the hills, so they could protect their farm, or see the predators coming, all right? And that really doesn't, well, I hope, doesn't really apply anymore, We don't have to do that. And there are in between things where you can have a little bit of lawn if you want to have a view or whatever. It's okay to have a little bit of lawn, but you don't need acres and acres and acres of mowed lawns. And even our public spaces, we should,
Mhm.
we don't have to have that much lawn. Okay, you can have the soccer field, but
Right.
okay, well, our time is just about up. So I'm just wondering if anybody else has anything they want to share with us before we close out. Well, I just want to thank you all for coming and, do what you can to share. I mean, I feel like I'm talking to the choir here, but go sing it out, right? Okay, sing it out loud and clear so that more people get the idea and just show them that, hey, this is cool stuff too. It doesn't have to be manicured little blades of grass sticking up every place.
Thank you, Janet, for all this wisdom and for good conversation tonight. We appreciate it. All the work you do out in nature, in your yard, and in our community.
Yes,
And
thank you very much.
if anybody wants to come on a really great walk, Dan is leading a walk at Casca Regional Park on October 5th, where we will undoubtedly see all kinds of really interesting things in the leaf litter. So you can go to, you want to put the link in the chat real quick? We might
Yes,
have,
I included a link to all our outings.
oh, okay, great.
That
Okay,
that
so
one is on there too. So yes, and Janet will be there too to correct all my numerous mistakes. So anyone who can join us, I hope you can see you there.
yeah, okay, great. Good to see you all. Thanks for coming. Spread the word.
Thank you.
Thanks for your help, Dan. Appreciate it.
I was just looking for the control to stop the recording.
Oh, right. Maybe I have to do that. I
I
don't
see
even.
it.